The warning signs are flashing red, interest rates spiking, trade wars reigniting, and the U.S. economy, it's teetering on the edge. But here's the thing no one's talking about. If America falls into recession in 2025, it won't fall alone. There are countries' entire economies so tightly wired to the U.S. that a single tremor in Washington could send them crashing. We're talking collapsed currencies, mass unemployment, political unrest, and all of it triggered not by their own missteps, but by a ripple from the world's biggest economy. So who's on the edge with America? From debt-ridden allies to trade-dependent giants, these are the 10 countries most likely to fall with the U.S. in 2025. And some of them, they might already be slipping. Number 10, Mexico. They share more than a border. Mexico and the United States are economically fused from auto parts and avocados to energy, tourism, and trade. But in 2025, that connection could become a curse. Roughly 80% of Mexico's exports go directly to the U.S., making it one of the most U.S.-dependent economies in the world. And if a recession hits American consumers, demand for Mexican goods plummets. Already, the Mexican peso has shown signs of weakness, dipping nearly 9% in the first quarter of 2025 amid growing U.S. recession fears. There's more. Remittances from Mexican workers in the U.S. reached a record $63 billion last year, a lifeline for rural communities. If jobs dry up in America, those remittances shrink, creating a double blow to Mexico's economy. And politically, things are fragile. With presidential elections approaching and cartel violence on the rise, economic instability could tip the balance. Analysts warn that a U.S. downturn could trigger protests, capital flight, and major strain on the peso. Mexico isn't just at risk. It's in the blast radius. And if the U.S. collapses, it could drag its southern neighbor down with it. Before we uncover the next country, hit that subscribe button, like, and hit the notification bell. It's your ticket to the stories no one else dares to tell. The more you support, the more truths we expose. Join us. Let's dig deeper together. Number 9, Canada. They call it America's closest ally, both in friendship and finance. But Canada's tight-knit economic bond with the U.S. could become its greatest vulnerability in 2025. If a recession hits south of the border, Ottawa won't escape the impact. Nearly 75% of Canada's exports go to the United States, from oil and timber to auto parts and agriculture. A slowdown in American demand could ripple across every major Canadian sector. Already, Canadian growth has slowed to just 1.1% in early 2025, with economists warning of a technical recession if U.S. markets crash. The Canadian dollar has begun slipping, losing ground against the U.S. dollar for 3 straight months. Why? Because investors fear a mirror downturn. And with household debt in Canada among the highest in the G7, even minor economic shocks could spell trouble for consumers. Add to that rising housing costs, healthcare pressures, and inflation fatigue, and the picture gets clearer. If the U.S. economy dips, Canada won't be able to cushion the blow, it'll absorb it, and fast. The bond between Canada and the U.S. is strong, but in 2025, that bond might pull both economies down instead of holding them up. Number 8, Philippines. From military bases to BPO call centers, the Philippines has long relied on close ties with the U.S. But in 2025, those ties could trigger an economic landslide. Over 40% of the Philippines' foreign remittances come from Filipino workers in the U.S. These remittances make up roughly 9% of the country's GDP. If American job markets freeze, Filipino families back home will feel it first and hardest. There's more. The Philippines' economy is heavily driven by U.S. outsourcing contracts. Think customer service, tech support, and data processing. If American companies slash budgets during a recession, tens of thousands of jobs in Metro Manila could vanish overnight. The peso has already started wobbling, down 6% since January 2025. And with inflation still hovering above 5%, the country has little room to maneuver. The central bank may be forced to hike interest rates again, putting even more pressure on middle-class families. The Philippines isn't in crisis yet, but it's standing on a thin economic tightrope, one that's anchored to the U.S. If that anchor falls, so does everything else. Number 7, South Korea. South Korea thrives on exports, innovation, and global trade. But behind the high-tech shine lies a dangerous dependency on U.S. economic stability. And in 2025, that dependence could backfire. The U.S. is South Korea's second largest export market, absorbing tens of billions in semiconductors, vehicles, and electronics. With American demand slowing, Korean manufacturers are already feeling the heat. Samsung and Hyundai have reported a 12% decline in U.S. orders in Q1 alone. Then there's the stock market. The Kospi index has dropped 9% year to date, as investors brace for fallout from a potential American recession. The won, Korea's currency, is also under pressure, sliding 7% against the dollar since February. And let's not forget the geopolitical risks. A weakened U.S. could shift the balance in the region, emboldening North Korea and straining Seoul's defense posture. That's a security risk with economic consequences. South Korea is no stranger to navigating storms. But if America crashes, its economy could face a chain reaction that reaches every factory floor, trade deal, and financial sector in the country. Number 6. Brazil. At first glance, Brazil looks shielded. It's in the southern hemisphere, with a diverse economy and growing trade with China. But in 2025, the cracks are showing, and they lead straight back to Washington. The U.S. remains Brazil's second largest trading partner, especially in oil, agriculture, and steel. A U.S. recession would slam commodity demand and send prices into a tailspin. Already, Brazilian soy and crude oil exports have dipped 6% in anticipation of a global slowdown. And then there's the dollar. Much of Brazil's corporate debt is denominated in USD. If U.S. interest rates stay high while revenue drops, companies will struggle to repay loans, risking a wave of defaults. The Brazilian real has weakened by 8% since January, a sign of global unease. Internally, Brazil is battling inflation, high unemployment, and political volatility. A U.S. crash could trigger capital flight, foreign divestment, and social unrest, especially in vulnerable rural areas. Brazil may be thousands of miles from Wall Street. But in 2025, a shake in the U.S. could hit Latin America's largest economy like a financial earthquake. Number 5. Japan. It's one of the world's strongest economies, but in 2025, Japan faces a fragile moment. The country's deep financial ties to the U.S. could leave it dangerously exposed if America plunges into recession. Japanese companies hold nearly $1.1 trillion in U.S. assets, from government bonds to equities. If Wall Street crashes, Japan's institutional investors take a hit, and so does the yen. The currency has already slipped 6.5% since January, with central bank officials issuing warnings about increased volatility. Japan's export economy is also at risk. The U.S. is Japan's largest foreign customer, and demand is already softening. In April 2025, exports to the U.S. fell 9% year over year, driven by slumping auto sales and electronic parts orders. On the domestic front, Japan is juggling aging demographics, slow wage growth, and massive public debt. A global slowdown led by the U.S. could trigger a dangerous deflation spiral, something Japan has fought to avoid for decades. For a nation that values stability above all, a U.S. crash could rattle Japan's markets, its policy playbook, and its confidence in global leadership. Number 4. Nigeria. Africa's largest economy may seem insulated, but Nigeria's link to the U.S. is more direct than most realize. And in 2025, that connection is beginning to crack. Nigeria is heavily reliant on oil exports, and the U.S. remains one of its top buyers. If a recession reduces global energy demand, Nigeria's budget takes a direct hit. Already, oil prices have dipped below $70 per barrel, far below Nigeria's break-even point of $85. Then there's the dollar dilemma. Nigeria's foreign reserves are largely in USD, and its national debt is increasingly dollar-denominated. As the dollar strengthens and capital flees emerging markets, Nigeria's central bank is burning through reserves to defend the naira. Inflation is another ticking bomb. In March 2025, Nigeria's inflation rate soared past 29%, eroding purchasing power and increasing poverty. A U.S.-triggered slowdown could worsen food shortages and widen inequality across the country. The government is already facing protests over fuel subsidies and cash scarcity. Add an American crash to the equation, and Nigeria's fragile stability could shatter fast. Number 3. Thailand. A tropical hub for tourism, trade, and tech, Thailand may seem far from Wall Street's troubles. But in 2025, its economy is dangerously tethered to the fate of the U.S. America is Thailand's third-largest trading partner, with billions flowing annually through electronics, garments, and automotive parts. When American consumers pull back, Thai factories feel the chill. In Q1 of 2025, exports to the U.S. dropped 8.2%, according to the Ministry of Commerce. Tourism is another pressure point. A significant portion of Thailand's tourist revenue comes from American travelers, and with recession warnings sounding, international bookings are already slowing. The Tourism Authority of Thailand reports a 12% drop in U.S. arrivals compared to the previous year. Meanwhile, the Thai baht has weakened, prompting the central bank to intervene. Rising interest rates in the U.S. have sparked capital outflows from Southeast Asia, hitting Thailand's stock market and business confidence. If the U.S. crashes, Thailand isn't just collateral damage, it's in the economic blast zone. And with elections looming and youth unemployment rising, the country can't afford another external shock. Number 2. United Kingdom. Brexit was supposed to offer independence, but in 2025, the UK finds itself more exposed than ever to the fate of the U.S. economy, and the signs are getting darker. America is the UK's largest single-country trading partner, and financial markets in London dance closely with Wall Street. Already, FTSE 100 stocks have dipped 7% this year, reacting to U.S. recession forecasts and weaker global sentiment. The British pound has also stumbled, down 5.4% against the dollar since February. With inflation still uncomfortably high at 4.7%, the Bank of England faces a no-win scenario: raise rates and crush growth, or stand still and risk capital flight. Consumer confidence is waning. Small businesses reliant on U.S. exports and investment are sounding the alarm. Meanwhile, British banks with exposure to American mortgages and credit markets are tightening lending. The UK has weathered storms before, but with its economy still rebalancing post-Brexit, a less recession could tip the scales into a deeper crisis, dragging the pound, the markets, and political stability down with it. Number 1. India. It's one of the fastest-growing economies on the planet. But in 2025, even India isn't safe from the shockwaves of a U.S. crash. And here's why it matters more than ever. The U.S. is India's largest export market, accounting for over $100 billion in goods and services annually. From pharmaceuticals to tech support to textiles, American demand powers millions of Indian jobs. But early this year, Indian IT giants like Infosys and TCS reported weaker U.S. contracts, a clear warning of what's ahead. The rupee has already lost 4.9% against the dollar in 2025. Capital outflows are rising as foreign investors shift assets to safer markets. And with India's interest rates holding steady while the U.S. hikes theirs, the financial squeeze is building fast. The domestic story adds more pressure. Youth unemployment remains stubbornly high. Food inflation is creeping back up. And a U.S.-led downturn could stall investment just as India ramps up infrastructure and energy projects. India may be resilient, but it's not immune. If the U.S. recession takes hold, it could derail India's momentum and shake one of the most promising growth stories of the decade. The U.S. might be the epicenter, but when it cracks, the aftershocks don't stop at its borders. They travel fast, hit hard, and pull others down in their wake. These 10 countries aren't just vulnerable, they're linked through trade, finance, and global trust. And in 2025, that trust is hanging by a thread. So what happens next? A global reset, a tightening of belts, and possibly a rewriting of alliances. Because if the U.S. falls into recession, the world won't watch, it'll follow. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who needs to understand what's really at stake. This isn't just a downturn. It might be the beginning of something much bigger.